Having finally achieved commercial success with the release of Mortal Kombat, Paul W.S. Anderson turned down the chance of directing the ill-advised sequel, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, along with offers to direct the first X-Men movie as well. Instead, Anderson chose the option to make an R-rated horror movie instead, which itself an unquestionably risky move on Anderson's part, and ultimately a vision which would feel the wrath of the censors' shears when his initial cut received the Kiss of Death NC-17 rating from the MPAA. The film itself, equal parts blue-collar sci-fi and a homage to his favourite horror films, sees a rescue crew uncover the secrets of this interstellar Mary Celeste of the title. The film itself initially bombed at the box office, only to find a significant cult following since its release, especially as critics and audiences have returned to re-evaluate Anderson's filmography, which this still remains one of the most curious entries. I'm Elwood.
I'm Kim.
And this is Movies and Tea. Let's take it to the boot 3 of Movies and Tea. We're still continuing our journey through the filmography of Paul W.S. Anderson. Now we're on to possibly the film which served as the catalyst for this podcast, because certainly when we were discussing directors and films which we wanted to look at, we originally had a director in mind for our first season, and then when we both found out that we both liked Event Horizon, it sort of all got scrapped so we could do Paul W.S. Anderson instead. And the rest is history, as they say. But Event Horizon is certainly a unique move for Paul W.S. Anderson. At this point, we've seen him do really sort of the social thriller with Shopping. We then went on to do his first video game adaptation with Mortal Kombat, and now he's moved on to making horror movies. So in the space of 3 movies, he's covered 3 very different genres to each other. At the same time, we're still now starting to see the familiar themes, especially in terms of the visual style of Anderson's work, which we started to see with Mortal Kombat. But first impressions, I mean, Kim, what is it about Event Horizon that really appeals to yourself?
It's the thriller aspect. I really like psychological thrillers, and I feel like to do a really good psychological thriller is a huge challenge, and for the most part, I think that he achieves it right on spot. I like every time I watch Event Horizon, I get so drawn into the film and so interested in what goes on, even if I know what's gonna go on next. And I feel like there's like a deeper sort of story here, that like there's like this unknown as well that surrounds the Event Horizon itself, which is the spaceship that it's called. So,
yeah.
just to clarify that. So not the movie, but the ship itself, Event Horizon, has this like mystery around it that never really fully gets explained, I guess. But you kind of have to take the word for it that it's kind of like they kind of say, oh, it went to hell and it came back much worse, sort of thing. And it's really neat because nothing is more traumatizing than watching someone feel like they're getting played by the ship, as they get like all these illusions that their loved ones and all the things that trouble them are coming back to life. Oh,
definitely. I mean, this obviously takes place on an alternate history timeline. At this point, according to Anderson's timeline, we're already supposed to have colonized Mars, so we're behind schedule already. And in many ways, the Event Horizon is kind of like the interstellar Titanic of its time, because it sets forth on its maiden voyage in the year 2040, and then minutes into activating the drive, which essentially enables it to go faster than light, as we find out later, enables it to essentially fold space. So in layman's terms, it creates a direct, like a wormhole to go through, to obviously get to sort of the furthest reaches of space, which was designed. So,
well, I think just to cut you there, if you don't understand what flipping time or flipping the space is, think like Stranger Things of Upside Down. That's pretty much the same concept, but on land.
Yeah. So, I mean, the ship itself, it vanishes. Nobody knows where it is, and it's like declared like the worst tragedy in space history. And then 9 months down the line, the spaceship reappears. Nobody knows where it's been or what's happened to the crew, and we now following this rescue crew who are basically sent in to find out what happened to the ship. Along them, we've got Dr. Weir, who was the designer of the ship, who's played by Sam Neill. And Sam Neill, I think, is on incredible form here, and we're going to come back to his performance here because it's probably one of the greatest character shifts that I've seen in like such a long time, and I was only really reminded of it again when we were rewatching this film. But right from the start, when we're introduced to the Event Horizon, I mean, there's this ominous feeling to it before we even look inside the ship. The fact it's in this like the orbit of Neptune, which is like shown as this stormy planet, and we go inside and we've got bits of what we assume was the crew. We've got this figure that's like floating in zero gravity, and clearly something has gone down on the ship. And as we basically follow this rescue crew, they start to uncover the secrets of the ship, and they realize that things aren't quite what they seem. Like you said, Kim, the ship itself has come back changed, and
yeah,
to say the least,
mentally and physically, I would say.
Now, I mean, let's just obviously just talk visually about the ship. I mean, the ship itself is modelled after the Notre Dame Cathedral, so it's got this unquestionable Gothic look to it. We've got the spires, which are the turned upside down and use the engine. The actual model used for the Event Horizon, there is an X-Wing model built into the top of it. If you're looking a bit closely, you can see that as well. But even when we get inside, it's like very much like a church design. We've got these crucifix-style windows. We've got this long passageway.
These arches around the doors, even.
Yeah, so it makes me wonder why there's so much Christian iconography that's gone into the ship. Certainly, it plays well when we obviously get onto the hell elements there. But I mean, this is sort of like very much drawing inspiration from like Clive Barker, who did work on the pre-production for the film, and you can see his paw prints all over this film, especially when we get into the gore aspects, because there's certainly the darker moments of this film is the sort of thing that anyone familiar with Barker's work will know already, certainly in terms of like things like Hellraiser, or if you're like a fan of Norwegian death metal. I mean, this will be very much up your alley of what we're going to be exposed to in the film, but yeah, there's just something very visually appealing about the design of the ship. It's very unlike anything that we've seen before, and as we mentioned earlier, I mean, this is blue-collar space, which is something I always really loved. It's why I love the Alien saga so much, because, you know, at this point in history, space isn't about the elite few. This is just, you know, an everyday job. These are just everyday Joes who are out doing a job. It just happens to be in space. So there's no like ill-fitting cod pieces or jumpsuits. It's all, you know, just regular guys and girls who are out there doing a job, which I just really, really, really like about this.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I mean, like, it definitely has its appeal, especially because it makes the film a lot more fun and a lot more easy to get into these characters. I mean, like, on top of that, like, there are a lot of really familiar faces. Like, I didn't even know, like, I mean, obviously, Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Neill were two names that are incredibly familiar to me the first time I watched this film. But, you know, as, you know, the years have gone by and I'm watching this now, I'm putting more, like, focus on things. And I was like, oh, Jason Isaacs is in this. And then I was like, oh, right, Sean Pertwee was in this too. Oh, right, you know? You never realize these little connections in, like, the movies before that he's done and the people that they're bringing back and that sort of thing. And, you know, like, you've seen this change of, like, over the years, you know, like, I've seen, you know, Jason Isaacs, obviously, in the Harry Potter series. And now you see him in this in a much, much younger role. And it's a completely different dynamic as to what he's playing as well. Like, I honestly didn't recognize him even watching it this time. So there's a whole lot, like, you know, it helps that, you know, the faces are familiar now, but at the same time, it's, you know, the roles they play are so, like, they kind of balance each other out, and they have these, like, fun little have these like it's kind of like an alien structure in many ways, in the sense that, you know, you start at first, you know, you get to know them, they joke a little, you kind of have an idea of what their personalities are, and then, you know, the story moves on, and you kind of like wonder, like, you start seeing what's, you know, what are their demons as the movie goes along, and that's a really neat take on, like, just having the setting that they chose.
Yeah, definitely. I think certainly when we talk about the setting for the film, I mean, the original script for the film saw the crew very similar to Alien. I mean, it's very hard to compare this film to Alien, because they are very similar. I mean, it's the haunted house in space, which is the same for both films here. The original script for this did see the crew fighting like very Lovecraftian aliens that had taken over the ship. So we had these like long tentacled aliens that they were battling, and Anderson rightfully felt that if he stuck with that idea, it's going to be too much of an Alien ripoff. It's not going to be the sort of film he wanted to make. So instead, it's still very much in that Lovecraftian vibe. He goes for the unspeakable horror side of things. So what happens to the crew, we get in like very quick sort of bursts. Again, this is mainly due to the censors, because a lot of the fate of the crew was a lot more explicit in the original cut, but we get this sense of the unseeable horror element which he goes with, and I think it's much more to the film's benefit that we go down that path. But like we were saying, as with Alien, these are just like everyday folks, and we can see that in like how the crew interact, as you said. And I think one of the key moments when Dr. Weir's explaining how the gravity drive, like the heart of the Event Horizon works, and he's like tries to do the science thing, and he's like, no, break it down to layman terms, and then he's trying to explain again, he's like, no, break it down further. So these you can tell that why they work in space, they, you know, they're not into like the specifics and the science of how space travel works. The actual gravity drive, how he explains it using a magazine and a pencil just to show how space bends. And I thought it was just like a really great touch. And there's so many aspects of this film where you think, oh, that's just like a flamboyant flare. Like when we look at the gravity drive itself, and it's like this rotating orb, which does bring back obviously memories of Hellraiser's Lament Cube, the puzzle box, and this was actually intentional because Anderson's a big fan of Hellraiser, and he wanted to make the drive his own version of the puzzle box, so we get that. And even when we're looking at like the Psycho Funhouse tunnel, which is like this grinder tunnel, and you think that's just health and safety nightmare right off. But
it's incredible, because I actually went. I think I went to a Ripley's in. I think the Ripley's, believe it or not, in New York or something. I can't remember, New York or Niagara Falls or something. And they had that exact tunnel. I remember taking a picture in it. I really loved it. I was like, oh my god, this is so awesome. You know? Yeah, no, I think that like visually, like we're kind of going back into like the ship design now, but I really, really like think that the ship design is one of those things that really give it character. Like, not only is it talking about, you know, like just the cathedral design throughout, but also like these little things, like the core drive is like this big part of the movie itself. So as you go in, you kind of like have these little spinning things and these little like deceptive corridors where you're like, oh, someone's gonna get dizzy and fall down or something, you know? And then you have like, you walk in, there's all these like spiky walls and this big thing that turns and makes a weird sound or something, and then it turns into this like Starship Troopers Starship Troopers sort of like gate. Is it Starship Trooper? Stargate SG-1. That sort of like thing that transports you through, and there's like all these little like, I think that maybe like what feels weird is that Event Horizon, like I don't know the time frame of this and all these other things that show up in the film, but like whether it's inspired other movies to do things or whether it was inspired by something else. But I mean, I never have problems with movies that like kind of pay homage to things they really think are creative and things that they find are, really interesting. I think that it's nice, like especially if they work it in a unique way into the story that they're building. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I do like Event Horizon so much.
Yeah, I think you really nailed it down there. It's the construction. It's great that he's homaging these different horror movies, and he's not just cutting and pasting ideas. It's like Tarantino. It's all about the construction. It's how he uses those ideas and puts them into his own film. And certainly with the Gravity Drive, I love the fact that again, in the original script, it's just a standard sort of mechanical device, but in Anderson's hands, it becomes this object of fascination, and ultimately, it's what's seen as sending various crew members either mad or possessed. It's a little unclear what. Mm-hmm. Like you said, it also serves as a portal to hell, so it serves many functions, and just the way it moves, the way the lights come on, it's got this it's seemingly got its life of its own. You've got the feeling that it's like the ship itself, that it's come back with this sentient mind. It's not this idea that the ship itself is haunted. It's like the ship itself is now alive because it's been possessed by whatever dimension it ended up in, be it hell or some hell dimension that it's ended up in. And as we said, while it's seems like a lot of visual flair, we're seeing a lot of Anderson's favorite trademarks, such as the endless corridor, as we see with that grinder corridor, which I love the fact that what I really love was, sorry that I interrupted you, but what I love is the fact that there's this huge long corridor between the front and the back of the ship. And I think that is we've been talking about long corridors and his love for it, and it just kind of piqued my interest. And suddenly I was like, oh yeah, this one has it too, even works in symmetry, like the explosive devices that go along the corridor, because he's worked out the way to have this ship so that the middle section, which is this long corridor, he's going to have these explosive charges, but they're all in symmetry. Which is sort of he had to work in symmetry some way, so he works it in the explosive devices. So if the crew need to escape the ship, they would all go in the front portion, and it would blow apart, and the back portion would force the front part. And I love the fact he's clearly sat down and thought, okay, I've got these visual ideas, but I have to explain it. So we want to have this meat grinder corridor, but we can't just have that. So he's sort of oh, this is to avoid the compromising of the magnetic fields caused by the gravity drive. So he explains away anything that sort of seems like a gratuitous visual flair at all. And the real trick here is the fact we see about 5 different areas of the ship. We see the bridge, the med bay, the hallway, and the engine room. But in our minds, I've played this trick that we've seen the whole ship. Mm-hmm. When we've only seen 5 areas, but we get this feeling that we've seen the whole ship, much like with Alien. We never see the whole of the Nostromo, but we have in our mind that we've been to all the different areas of the ship, even though we've only seen a small little portion of it. And certainly when we get into the finale, and we've got the Kathleen Quinlan's character, who in her mind, she's the whole film, her fear is for her son, who is disabled, for him to be in pain. So, okay, we're just gonna say now, spoiler alert. She's at the end, she's feels that she sees him, and she goes to chase after him, and ends up falling to her demise in a really cool death sequence. And it's not only this wonderful nod to Don't Look Now, the ending where the lead thinks that he sees his daughter, this girl in the little girl in the red coat, who he's been sort of taunting him through the streets of Venice. So it's a real fun sort of play on that scene.
Is it though? I've never seen Don't Look Now, but I actually thought about because there was one scene where her boy was standing in water, and I actually thought it actually reminded me of that It scene with with the little boy in the yellow raincoat just standing at the end of the sewage area. Also, so I don't know. I don't know. I've never seen Don't Look Now, but that was what I thought of when I saw it.
Yeah, I think that's just some of these homages. You can tell that Anderson's a big horror fan because some of them are a little more obscure than others. I mean, he works in the blood torrent from The Shining, which we obviously see coming out the lift in that memorable scene, and which has since been memed to death. And here he gives us his own version, which he was the reason he cast Jolie Richardson because he wanted to have her specifically in that scene because he thought that this posh-speaking English actress, it'd be really amusing in his mind to see her covered in this torrent of blood that was like flowing down this hallway. So it worked for him, and she's great in the film. I mean, just going back to the cast here, I mean, this is, as you said, Ray, this is a cast of known actors like Lawrence Fishburne, Sam Neill, and lesser known actors. Like, we've got Richard T. Jones as Cooper, who provides the much needed humor elements of the film. We've also got this really sort of adopted mother-son relationship between Catherine Quinlan's character and Jack Noseworthy. And I couldn't help but wonder if the relationship they have, because he calls her Mama Bear, she calls him Baby Bear, is this sort of like is he like the surrogate son to her because he's obviously away from her own son for like months at a time? Is this a way of dealing with being away from her own son, that she has this surrogate son in the youngest crew member? And they seem to share this mutual bond, even though it's never really fully explored. We just get obviously the pet names they have for each other.
Yeah, I think that I thought about that too, and I felt like her character really focused on the mom aspect and just like her regrets as a mom. So I feel that like as the movie went along, it was kind of like, you know, the first person that was targeted was the character Justin, which is Baby Bear, and it feels like, you know, as she's struggling with like this character being constantly attacked, which is like, I felt so bad for that character. I was like, oh my god, this is so horrible. And then it's like, you know, he just keeps getting all the crappy deals, you know, he gets thrown into space and all that stuff. And then she keeps getting these, these traumatic events of just like this, you know, as you call it, a surrogate son sort of character that is going through the things that, you know, the pain that her son is going through as well. You know, it feels like that's probably what breaks her and makes her one of those characters which are easier for like the ship to, I guess, invade into her mental space, I guess.
Oh, definitely. And it's interesting to see how the different characters obviously deal with the situation, because Lawrence Fishburne, his character Captain Miller, he's very methodical in his approach, despite the fact he's just like clearly there to do a job. I mean, he's haunted by this the memories of this crew member he lost on a previous job, and he's very much now driven to the fact that he will never leave a crew man behind. He will never lose someone on a job. And the ship, as I said, it taps into these fears, so he's like constantly taunted by the images of this burning crewman. Other members of the crew don't seem to ever be affected, but at the same time they're more sort of caught up in the events that are happening to the other crew, so they know something's happening even though it's not happening directly to them. And certainly when we look at Jason Isaacs' character, DJ, his character, in particular his fear, and is this obviously this in relation to his own childhood surgeries, which is in the script, but again it's something that's suffered on the cutting room floor, and the scars on his chest that we obviously see, because he gets a really Barker-esque death in the fact that he's basically strung up and eviscerated.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously when we look at like Sean Pertwee's Smith, who's basically like the engineer, he just knows something's going down and he's going to get off this ship. And I felt so sorry for him when he finally rebuilds his ship, which has suffered all this damage, and he's like ready to go, and then he like discovers the fact that a bomb has been planted on it, and you can see this look of, oh no, I've just rebuilt this thing, like his last one. And it just made me wish that Anderson worked with Sean Pertwee more, because he's just so good in this, and he was so good in Shopping. It's a shame they didn't really work more, and now we obviously get to enjoy Sean Pertwee doing essentially the same thing in Gotham. But
yeah. Oh man, I love talking about that Sean Pertwee and Gotham. So good, so good. I actually heard Sean Pertwee talk at Toronto Comic Con one year, and it was amazing. Like, this man is like really, really cool. He's a cool dude.
I feel that, yeah, I think certainly Cinema Gotham, seeing how he's like used the character of Alfred on Gotham, and it's great the fact he seems to have used all the notes that Michael Caine brought over to Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, the fact that he's now an ex-military man. And these are all like notes that Michael Caine brought to it, because he was like reinvented the character of Alfred. He was sort of like, well, if the Waynes wanted someone who's going to like look after their son, they want like someone who's like ex-military. So in the character in Alfred, the way Michael Caine reinvented it, he's like ex-SAS. So he's able to look after himself, and that makes him the ideal protector for Bruce Wayne. And I love the fact that he's just carried across all these notes that Michael Caine has developed for this character, and is now working it into his own vision within the realm of Gotham, which for one is still one of the best superhero shows on TV at the moment. I think it's well worth discovering if you haven't already. But
yeah, so going we had a little Gotham sidetrack. Going back, no, I think the thing that I think like one of the things that people need to remember, I think, is that it's really nice to see that people are reevaluating Paul Anderson's films right now, and especially since we're kind of joining in that sort of movement.
Yeah.
Because, if you think about it, we talked, like you mentioned before, Paul Anderson did 2 movies before. He did one which was an action video game adaptation, and then he did one which was a social thriller. So this is his first move into something like a psychological horror thriller sort of style. And it's a big challenge, Personally, I think it's a big challenge because horror thrillers are, like 1 in a million. Not a lot of people are able to get there, And I feel that it's, like if you think about it, he achieved quite a bit with this one. As much as, there are a lot of homages. If you think about a lot of like debut titles from like, say, indie horror directors nowadays, a lot of people base their movies through homages too, as, a key selling point. And, to think that, he actually worked this into just paying homage while sharing a story and that he, and directing a story that really intrigued him, along with having all these like really gory and kind of like it's an intense experience to say the least. Like you don't expect it to be this intense, like you didn't. It's quite, like you said, like just looking at how Jason Isaac's character kind of like goes. It's kind of there are a lot of really really disgusting moments. So I think like as just like what he's done here, it really, I feel like he's done a really great job. As like the first horror film that he's done, he's able to create a lot of the atmosphere, build a really nice setting, and his cast is able to, give that kind of like alien vibe where, they're like a team of like normal people who doesn't really know a lot about space. And it's I think that everything really works well together, and it's surprising how it wasn't well received, and I wonder why it wasn't well received when it first came out.
I think mainly because of the fact it was a gory horror. I mean, gory horror wasn't doing well. I mean, horror as a whole was on the decline. Many sort of franchises had sort of burnt themselves out at this point. I think Jason was busy taking over Manhattan around this sort of period. And
I think Jason taking over Manhattan was like 96 or something. So yeah, it was around that time. I mean, Nightmare had a bunch of movies by then, I think, also, and Halloween also was in their like X amount of films as well. All the, a lot of main franchises were busy running running out of steam.
It's this the thing. I think a lot of the great horror icons that were still putting out movies have become more sort of pop culture icons, and it's become more about the kill than the suspense leading up to it. I mean, Freddy was more about, oh, what's one line is he going to do? Jason was like, how's he going to dispatch the disposable teens this time? And I think people were very much sort of burnt out on horror, especially after like the glut of horror movies we had through like the golden
80s.
days of like the 80s. And I think this film, I don't know, it's so different as well. I mean, this is, as I said, this is a sci-fi horror, which itself isn't the most overworked of genres, when we certainly look at the horror genre. I mean, obviously, we've got like Alien, we've got Predators, sort of like the standout examples, and you have something like this, which I'm so glad that it's now been rediscovered. And certainly the fact that it was really when it was released on VHS, and it's sort of through word of mouth, it sort of picked up this sort of like cult following, which it rightfully deserves. But this is a film which is so, yes, while it's certainly gory, I mean, the first 3/4 of the film is played very psychological. I mean, here Anderson is able to create more terror through the sound of fingertips running over fabric than any of the gory effects that we see up to this point. I mean, we get a couple of gory thrills, such as seeing what happens when someone goes into a vacuum. That's kind of cool to see. But it's like, by the time, it's all about the building up. It's all, at this point, it's also like mind games and like, and sort of like jump scares as he builds up to his final quarter. And this is where the film, like, it sort of like not only goes off the rails, but like careers like off the rails into sort of like, you see where he's like, what he's been building up to, as we get like this reveal of what happened to the crew through these like quick cuts of the footage of them after they've, as we assume, they've basically gone into this hell dimension and everything's gone to hell in a handbasket. The crew are basically mutilating each other. There's cannibalism. There's people being killed in horrible ways. The actual footage of the crew being sent to hell was originally more gruesome, but it was like heavily cut down to the flashes that we get. I mean, there's actually some notes and there's some stills that are available that show people like being garroted with barbed wire. There's spikes being put through. There's, I mean, the notes, there's scenes of there's notes of a girl having her breasts torn off. There's my favorite part of the notes is the fact that they're talking about this amputee actor, because they employed several amputee actors that they build fake prosthetic limbs for, which they could then destroy. And the special effects guy, he talks about the guy they got brought in for the scene. He's like, oh, he's like actually better off his legs than he is on them. And that they built in these fake legs that were going to be like beaten and broken up with iron bars. And there's people out there is like apparently this footage out there, but whether we're going to ever see like a cabal cut of this film, the same way that we got with Nightbreed, where they're going to reinsert all this like footage that apparently there's like a VHS cut, which is like got all the gore in, and includes some like really cool sequences, such as there's a homage to The Exorcist, where we see a naked Sam Neill doing a spider walk down a ladder, which I kind of thought sounded like kind of cool. So sorry to anyone who wanted to see naked Sam Neill, it doesn't happen. And on the DVD there are some deleted scenes, like we get to see them, there's a tooth that's floating in zero gravity, but because the special effects haven't been completed, you can see the string holding it. But Lawrence Fishburne's like acting like in this supposed zero gravity environment, which is really a credit to him that he sells zero gravity as well as he does. But there's certainly some interesting ideas there. I mean, there's much talk of like cannibalism and murder, and the fact that they drafted in all these like adult actors to film this scene that was ultimately cut. So whether it's something that sounds great on paper that didn't actually work in real life, it's hard to say. But I feel that because he restrains himself, that while we certainly do get gore, I mean, we obviously get the self-mutilation Dr. Weir inflicts on himself, which I have to say, first time I saw this was real sort of like, oh, that's kind of shocking, to say the least. It really comes completely out of left field, and the gore moments that make up that final quarter really catch you off guard. And I think the film's only the more effective the fact it's had to be pulled back from the original intention. I mean, as we said already, Anderson set out to make this like an R-rated horror movie, so he was going to go like full out with the gore and splatter, and because the censors were going to give it the NC-17 rating, that he had to like trim it down, and as well because the test audiences weren't reacting well to his vision. And it's ultimately, it comes off all the more effective. Like the scene when we have the scenes with Dr. Weir, who at this point has been like fully possessed by the ship, and he's like self-mutilating himself, and just seeing how everything's basically going to hell for this rescue crew. It just comes off all the more effective the fact that it's now more restrained than just like balls to the wall gore and splatter, which I think either works well or it will like kill the audience's interest dead. Yeah. It's a very fine line to go, and certainly when we look at films like in like the new French extremity movement, so things such as like Martyr and Frontiers, High Tension or Switchblade Romance, you can see that when those films like push the boundary too far, that they lose their audience. Whereas when you look at something like Martyrs, it's walking that tightrope of like shock and gore, that is very effective when you can pull it off, but it is a very difficult trick to pull off. And I think what we ultimately end up with here is ultimately more effective in my personal opinion. I don't know about yourself, Kim.
Well, yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I like the fact that he focused, I think because he dialed it back, that he had to focus more on that thriller aspect. And I mean, like, as much as, you know, I mean, I never found gore very scary in that sense where, like, yeah, they have, like, you know, it's disgusting, but making me sick from disgusting me and scaring me are two very, very different feelings. So a movie that disgusts me is not necessarily good, but a movie that thrills me into being really intense and feeling like very anxious about the movie is a really huge achievement, because I have this really wonderful, I'm really good at predicting what goes on in movies. I find movies really predictable, so thrillers are really hard for me to enjoy sometimes, but I always love movies that can give me that, you know, that really nice feeling of just feeling like that adrenaline rush as they go through these scary scenes and horrible situations. I don't know what that says about me, but
well, I mean, Jason Isaacs actually wanted the dummy that they used for his corpse hanging, but the special effects crew were apparently so freaked out by the request that they declined and said they needed it for further shots, even though they didn't. So what he wanted that for, I don't know, but
yeah. So anyways, this is going on for a little bit long. So if we were to look at movies similar to, before we wrap this up, to talk about movies that are similar to this one that you would, you know, kind of recommend as like a pairing or a double feature or whatever, what would you suggest?
For myself, I would go with Pandorum. This is a film which I've really been sort of like much like The Fall. Since I watched it, I've been trying to get everyone I know who's like into these sorts of films to check it out. It's one of those films that came out, and I remember people like sort of talking about it at the time. I mean, this was 2009. This was released. It's a German-British sci-fi horror, but when you look at it, it's very similar visually to Event Horizon. And I'm just gonna say, watch this film blind. Because you will get such more of a payoff than if you, as I say, if you know too much about it. But I mean, this is a great cast. It features Dennis Quaid and Ben Foster. Basically, they wake up from hypersleep to find themselves on the ship. They have no idea who they are or where they are because of obviously the effects of hypersleep. And as they slowly adapt to the situation, they find that not everything is quite what it seems, and they also suddenly start to discover things about themselves which may also relate to the situation they find themselves in. I think Pandorum is if you're looking for a good comparison piece, I think then Pandorum's a great one to pair with Event Horizon. Other than that, I would say Sunshine by Danny Boyle. I think Danny Boyle owes a lot, again, to Paul W.S. Anderson. We said already that he sort of snuck in with Shallow Grave after Shopping came out to sort of launch the revival of British cinema. Again, when you look at the finale of Sunshine, it's very hard to not compare it to Event Horizon, the mysterious crazy man on board the ship.
Well, don't reveal too much. I still haven't seen Sunshine yet. I haven't seen Sunshine. It is on my list. Everybody tells me to watch it.
Yes.
And I haven't seen it yet. But for myself, the first movie that came to mind was Sphere, 1998 Sphere with Dustin Hoffman and Sharon Stone, Samuel L. Jackson, obviously. To be honest, I don't really remember much about this film, but I do remember it was a sci-fi thriller, and there was one part that I literally shrieked and jumped out of my seat when I was watching it. So I don't know if that will still happen today, since I watched it like 10 years ago. But I think like Sphere is also one of those movies which are kind of like cult acclaimed and not so much very loved by the people who first saw it, at least. I was looking at some of the stuff. I think it was like some odd low percentage on Rotten Tomatoes or something.
Yeah, but how can you trust Rotten Tomatoes?
Yeah, I usually feel very different. Quite the opposite from it. But yeah, other than that one, I mean, I would say something a little bit more recent would be 2013's Europa Report, which is an indie film set in, it actually feels very similar to this one, where it's like, you know, it's a future and people are exploring in their spaceship, and it's just like a ragtag team of people. It's like normal people. You really feel like they're, you know, they have their little moments where they bond, and then you start feeling like, you know, they land on this like island, and then this planet. And they start, you know, they start experiencing these things, or these they start feeling like it's something that I don't want to get too into. It also is kind of like a Pandorum deal, where you should go in knowing the least possible to really like discover the magic and the secrets that are in this thriller. I know it has like very mixed reviews as well, but I really liked it. It could be the Daniel Wu aspect, but I really liked it.
There we go. Yeah, I think that both really good. One I've seen Spear, and I definitely agree that it's a great one to pair. I mean, Spear also ties into that idea of the line between reality and hallucination. What's going on? I think they both have similar ideas, and I think Spear does some really interesting ideas. It's one of those films that wasn't appreciated when it came out, and I think it's gained that sort of cult following afterwards. And I think to really sort of put an end note on this, when Anson was going into work with Kurt Russell on the film we're going to be talking about on our next episode, Soldier, he showed him Event Horizon, and Russell basically said to him, forget about what this movie's doing now. In 15 years' time, this is going to be the movie you're glad you made. And I think that perfectly sums up how I feel about Event Horizon. I'm glad that he made it. And while it may not have like been this critical darling of a movie and this huge success for Anderson, I think it's a movie I'm so glad that he made. I still think it's fantastic, even after numerous viewings of this film. And it's still a film that I'm love to come back to, and sort of on a yearly basis, and just like find new details or just enjoy the thrill ride that it is. But yeah, out of his filmography, I think Event Horizon is always going to be that special one for me.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, as I said, that brings us to the end of this episode. And Kim, what are we going to be looking at for our next episode? Even though we've essentially given it away already.
We just talked about it. So we're going to be looking at Soldier, which was released in '98 and stars Kurt Russell. Woo!
Awesome. Of course, I'd like to say thank you as always to my co-host, Miss Kimlo.
Thanks.
And if you haven't done already, please do like or hit that subscribe button. We are now available on a variety of platforms. We are available on Podomatic, iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. So there's plenty of ways to interact with the show. Also, you can hit us up on both Facebook, or you can also hit us up on Twitter as well.
Yes, and you can check us out, and you can check us out our archive, which also has some of our reviews, which is our written reviews, which is at moviesandteapodcast.wordpress.com.
But until next time, gas on!